The year is 2014. Barack Obama is president, and I'm around 8 years old. At the time, I was going to primary school in Warsaw, Poland, and at the time, I was slowly starting to get into politics. I already knew a little bit about history, enough to know how lucky I was, since I knew that Poland had once been under communism, and before that, controlled by the Nazis, and I've heard about the awful living conditions during those times, and therefore I was genuinely grateful to be born in what I saw as a flourishing democracy, where at least in theory, anyone could succeed with hard work and creativity.
Liberal.
Back then, the world was moving in a clear direction, that being globalism.
Liberal.
Global trade was booming, the world economy was growing, countries seemed more connected year by year, and there was a sense of momentum, like we were heading somewhere better. And it seemed to me that Poland was part of this movement as part of the EU. At the time, Poland had been in the EU for 10 years already, and already Poland had been a huge economic success, and I could see the benefits of this cooperation between countries. And all these things were part of what I saw as the Western movement. And as a Polish kid, I saw America as one of our closest allies. Maybe I was naive, but I truly believed that the world would continue moving in the direction of cooperation between countries. But the first domino to shatter my dream for the future was the 2014 annexation of Crimea, the first step to breaking the rules of the global order. But then the leader of Poland, Donald Tusk, left to be the president of the European Council, and this caused a power vacuum in Poland that then a year later in 2015 caused the right-wing populist party of the Law and Justice Party in Poland to get elected, causing a new conflict between Poland and the EU. Then if we move 1 year later, in 2016, Donald Trump becomes president. And I remember clearly, I was around 10 years old at that point, and I remember me and my classmates singing Trump songs, like Trump parody songs, and laughing and watching memes and just finding the concept of Donald Trump becoming president as absolutely hilarious. I didn't realize the consequences this would eventually bring, but yeah. So the mentioned examples from 10 years ago, I guess, were the first signs that my vision for the future was in fact naive. Since fast forward 10 years, it's now 2025, I'm a big boy grown up, and look at the world now. So while on a graph the world has gotten richer, that is not because prosperity has gotten up. It's simply because late-stage capitalism causing the top 1%, or I should say the top 0.1%, getting extremely rich, while we all get the same or see very marginal improvements caused by technology. In 2015, the world's billionaires collectively held about $6.3 trillion. But by 2024, that figure more than doubled to 14 trillion, marking a 121% increase. Meanwhile, the top 1% now possesses more wealth than the 5 billion people combined. And I want to remind you, I'm not a communist or a socialist. I'm definitely a capitalist if I have to put a label on it. But we can't ignore the fact that union membership has never been lower, the upper higher class has never been richer, and inequality has also never been higher. It's crazy. And I'm not the only one noticing this.
I mean, this is like so fundamental to the American dream, the fact that you can roll up your sleeves, get to work hard, and rise through the ranks. What's wrong with that?
So that's much, much harder to do now than it used to be. And one of the reasons is that the middle has been stripped out of the labor market. Look, we've all heard statistics like that a CEO used to make about 20 times what a production worker makes. Now it's 300 times. But it's not just CEOs. A doctor used to make 4 times what a nurse makes. Now it's 8 times. A partner at a law firm used to make about 5 times what a legal secretary makes. Now it's 40 times. A bank president used to make about 50 times what a bank teller makes. Now it's 1,000 times. And what's happened is that the good middle-class, mid-skilled jobs that used to dominate work have been destroyed and replaced with a lot of gloomy jobs at the bottom and a few super elite glossy jobs at the top. And if we want to fix inequality, what we really have to do is fix that. We have to fix work.
And examples like Luigi Mangione is just an example of how people are starting to get fed up. And the trinkets of technology and capitalism aren't enough to satisfy the consumer class. And I do believe that a revolution is coming. Either a far-right revolution or a communist revolution. And like I said in my last video, 2 videos ago, it is looking closer to a far-right revolution. It has never been harder to buy a home. In the EU, house prices surged by an average of 48% between 2015 and 2023, with countries like Hungary experiencing an increase of 173%, which is crazy. And what is causing these problems? Well, I believe it's crises. When crises happen, it allows the top 1% to consolidate power, and it allows small companies, small struggling businesses to collapse and basically be engulfed by big boy business. During the COVID-19 pandemic alone, 573 individuals became billionaires, averaging 1 every 30 hours. And while that was happening, 263 million people were pushed into extreme poverty. And in the US alone, billionaire wealth soared 88% from 2.9 trillion in 2020 to 5.5 trillion in 2024. The richest of the richest are getting richer, and the poor are getting poorer, or staying the same, but comparatively poor. And I believe that the current tariffs in the US is basically a new COVID. I took so long to edit this video because I'm lazy that Trump has started bombing Iran. So everything I'm saying now can be basically applied to war with Iran now in the US as a new crisis. I'm not going to go into some conspiracy theories that COVID-19 was purposefully created or whatever to, increase the wealth of the 1%. But when it comes to these tariffs, there is no conspiracy, since it's literally Trump, a rich guy from New York with a bunch of billionaire friends. He's the one causing the new crisis, which is allowing large companies to consolidate power once again.
And he made $2.5 billion today, and he made $900 million. That's not bad, because he's in financials. I've always been fine.
Just think about the amount of small to medium businesses that are now gonna collapse once again, just like during COVID. I truly believe that Trump is creating these tariffs to enrich his friends. So, summarizing the introduction to this video, conflicts around the world benefit the richest of the rich, and that is why we aren't moving towards globalism. But these examples I just gave aren't the only crises that are causing inequality. The Russian invasion of Ukraine, the deadliest conflict in Europe since World War II, also caused this. Israel's war in Gaza, both of these wars in Ukraine and Israel, both are extremely helpful to the US because, first of all, they harm the enemies of the US, but even ignoring that, it is extremely beneficial to the US because of the US military-industrial complex. Since we have to remember that, like you Americans are probably realizing now more than ever, almost all of your manufacturing has moved to China. But the one manufacturing that stayed in the US is guns and weapons, the United States military-industrial complex. And that's why the more conflict, the more war, the more suffering there is in the world, the more America benefits and America's industry flourishes. And all these conflicts just support American industry while also enriching billionaires. Institutions like the European Union and NATO demonstrate that international cooperation can work, but only when countries are willing to cede some sovereignty to collective benefit. However, this level of unity requires nations to willingly integrate, right? And place mutual trust above individual power. And this is where the problem lies, right? And since leaders are human, leaders are therefore greedy, and that is why integration is so hard to happen, because governments don't want to willingly give up their power for the greater good. This natural instinct and paradox of greed is the primary argument against communism, since people are too selfish to share power, right? Yet even within capitalism, we observe the same patterns. Dictators resist stepping down, billionaires hesitate to share wealth, politicians cling to control, all of this at the end of the day because of the selfish natural instinct of the Homo sapiens. We have to stop acting like countries are animals that only care about self-preservation. Like, it's so silly to me. You're not able to function in a protectionist society. It's just impossible for you to manufacture all that shit because you guys don't want cheap jobs. You guys want to be rich. Crazy. We have already established that in the Western world, profits are the most important thing, and therefore it's only natural that in the last half of a century, Germany has had the geopolitical policy of Ostpolitik, where basically Germany, together with other European democratic powers, wanted to normalize relations with Eastern Europe. And this worked all fine with Poland and other post-communist countries, and the elephant in the room being Russia. Germany, together with Denmark and Western powers, over the last 50 years slowly normalized relations with Russia, building the Nord Stream pipeline and integrating the economy so that Europe was dependent for Russian energy, while having a huge consumer market for the Europeans to sell their stuff in Russia. And it didn't really matter to Germany or European countries that Russia was not being democratic, liberal, or aligned with their values. As long as shareholder value grew, it didn't matter. Of course, countries like Poland warned against this by saying that we shouldn't trust Russia, and Russia is inevitably gonna try to attack another country since they have an expansionist culture. And of course, it turned out Poland was right to be scared of Russia, and our huge dependence on Russia basically forced us to pay billions of euros to Russia while the invasion of Ukraine was continuing because we were so reliant on them. Now, for Europe, it is very obvious that it was a mistake to normalize relations with an authoritarian but democratic state. And now I do believe that history doesn't really repeat itself, but it definitely does rhyme. And we now have an authoritarian but democratic state in the United States. And I believe in the same way how we shouldn't be dependent on Russia, we should not be dependent on the technology of the USA. Since, first of all, Trump has openly said that he is not a fan of NATO. He openly said that EU was created to hurt the United States. And in 2018, in July, Trump privately told advisors he wanted to pull out of NATO. But, the democratic government did not allow this. So I truly believe that if Trump had the power, he would have probably left NATO by now. And this is not a very good ally. The entire defense of Europe is basically dependent on the US through NATO. And the only good thing Trump did for NATO was force us to boost our military spending, Poland having the biggest army in Europe now. So that's a good thing, but him threatening to leave NATO and in general being anti-Western, I would say, and pro-dictatorships means that we cannot trust America to be a reliable partner for the democratic liberal project. This is very sad to me, and of course you could say, Well, we should just wait the 3.5 years until a democratic president is elected and, close relations with the EU are gonna be good again. But I don't think that's a reliable method anymore. The US has shown that it is an unstable politically country, and the only rational conclusion to the political landscape is to distance ourselves from the US as fast as possible, making our own Microsoft, making our own technology to not be reliant on the US. And sorry, Americans, but you're forcing Europe to seek allegiances elsewhere. A couple weeks ago, we had an election here in Poland where Nawrocki won the elections. Nawrocki is basically like a Polish Trump. He is pretty anti-EU, anti-liberal, pro-conservative values, and pro-America. And this is just another step towards nationalist disunification, allowing countries like China and other big powers to treat Europe like a chessboard. And of course, Trump is tariffing Europe, he is economically punishing Europe, he is threatening us, and even when Trump stopped being president, the damage has been made, the trust is gone, and just like how we trusted Russia and regretted it, we mustn't do the same mistake now with America. So sorry, Americans. If we say hypothetically that Putin would attack Poland or the Baltics, do you truly believe that Trump would want American soldiers to die for some country in Europe? What's Trump's slogan again? America first. Why let American soldiers die for Europe? Trump has openly said he's against NATO, and I truly believe he just wouldn't help Europe or only send aid like in Ukraine. And that's why Europe must build their own military industrial complex and strengthen internally and seek allegiances elsewhere. So both in Trump's first candidacy and second candidacy, he has put tariffs on Europe. In 2018, he put 232 tariffs that affected 7.5 billion EU exports, and that's not how you treat allies, that's how you treat trade rivals. But this isn't only a European situation. Trump is distancing himself from countries all around the world. With the Doge US aid cutting funds and stuff, countries are just moving towards Beijing even more.
我在北京，老天保佑金山银山前路远，老天教唆别管江湖路，老天保佑金山银山前路远，老天教唆别管江湖路，老天保佑金山银山前路远，老天教唆别管江湖路。
We all know the maps of the biggest trade partners of countries changing from the year 2000 to nowadays, where almost the entire world is now closer economically to China. It seems like Trump is just accelerating the decline of the American empire. The world order that was established after World War II, where the US was the global policeman, while the US was withdrawing aid from strategic regions in Africa and Southeast Asia, China was expanding the Belt and Road Initiative even more. What are countries like Kenya, Indonesia, and Egypt now to do when they're not looking west anymore? They're obviously gonna start looking east to Beijing. This is what happens when America retreats, China fills the vacuum. Look, the EU depends on stability, because stability is the best for economic growth, shareholder value, right? And the US now is not predictable. It's emotional, polarized, and borderline ungovernable, with coup attempts, assassination attempts, chaos. The system is broken. It's not because Americans are bad or anything. I would even consider them European in many ways. It's just that their system is broken. And that's why depending on the US is just repeating our Russian mistake. Different flags, same colors, same blind trust. And I'll repeat myself. I am not a fan of China. China is an authoritarian dictatorship country that only cares about power, right? Like most countries do, like we've established already. However, China is rational. China knows how to play the long game, and it just is cooperating between countries. It is ironically doing the globalism that it's like China and America switched sides, and China is looking like the rational arbiter of capitalism. Like, it's crazy. So, with the sanctions war between China and the US, China and Europe are forced to trade even more, even remove tariff barriers between the cars and stuff, and increase cooperation. We even have similar flags that look good next to each other. So, as crazy as this sounds, I do believe Chinese-European cooperation would be more beneficial now than European-US relations. Statistically, when a country is democratic and has free trade in it, it grows profits, it becomes richer. And especially if it is democratic, because democracy is relatively stable, except in America, because this is why countries have been moving towards democracies, since, countries want to be rich and stuff. But China is an enigma. It is the first dictatorship, authoritarian dictatorship, which is genuinely very stable. No one is realistically thinking that anyone's gonna overthrow the Chinese government anytime soon, and it seems like it is just inevitably gonna keep growing. All empires had their peak, and I believe the peak of the US was like 15 years ago, maybe more, and we're just witnessing a slow decline that Trump seems to accelerate, and Europe should distance itself from the world, only seek economic cooperations with stable and cooperative countries. So I know I sound very pessimistic in my last couple of videos. However, I am somewhat optimistic, since I believe that after Trump becomes president, after Trump stops being president, after Nawrocki stops being president, after leaders like Putin and Trump will die since they're so old, I do believe in the next 10 years we will see the beginning of the golden age of liberalism, since politics often works in patterns or in the dichotomy of waves, right? The parambola in Polish, where as a consequence of one ideology's awful leadership, a couple years later, the opposition dominates, right? So I do believe that Trump and populist powers around the world are fucking up so badly right now that it will turn around and good times are hopefully coming. Or World War III, you never know. I'm joining the NATO military next month, so I hope not, but yeah. We trusted Russia and we got dependent on their energy. We trusted Silicon Valley and we got dependent on their technology. And each time we paid the price for believing imperial nations would behave cooperatively. We need to stop being surprised when selfish countries act selfishly. The concept of the nation state itself is inherently flawed. It fuels competition over cooperation. It exploits our instinctual need for tribalism, not to build peace and cooperation, but to gain influence and power. That's why the most moral nation of the European Union might not be perfect, but it is an anti-imperial experiment that matters and is the one true hope for humanity, for us to unite. Because the EU was built to prevent empire, not to become one. And Europe therefore needs its own spine in tech, in defense, and especially diplomacy. Not to become a new empire, but to flourish through cooperation and order. I'm not anti-American, I'm just pro-European. And if you believe in democracy, globalism, free speech, and open trade, you should be terrified by what you're seeing right now. Because if Europe doesn't unite, we'll just keep repeating history under different flags with the same regrets. Imperialism must be dismantled everywhere, in America and Asia, in Africa, everywhere. Imperialism is a system of exploitation that occurs not only in the brutal form of those who come with guns to conquer territory, like they did in the past, But nowadays, imperialism often occurs in more subtle forms: a loan, food aid, blackmail. We are fighting this system that allows a handful of men on Earth to rule all of humanity. And these last two sentences were by Thomas Sankara, an anti-imperialist leader of Burkina Faso. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Feel free to leave a comment on your opinions. Remember, you don't have to agree with everything you watch on YouTube, you can still enjoy the content. And leave a like and subscribe maybe. And as always, farewell, żegnam, and goodbye.
Human smuggling, fentanyl deaths, forced government euthanasia, chopping up children's genitals, la 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 la.